Chapter 17. The Scuttler. A blind man would have been better off than Robbie at that moment, for a blind man could at least have used his other senses to aid him. Robbie was so panic-stricken, however, that he could not even judge the direction of the voices echoing faintly back to him, and by the time the green glow rolled over the sky again, the figures he had been following were too far off for him to say exactly which house they were making for, or which one of them was Elspeth. He would just have to make for the nearest house, he decided then, for that would be the likeliest place to find her, and off he went, running as hard as he could towards a gleam of yellow lamplight beckoning from across the hill. But no, he was told when he reached this house, Elspeth was not there. "Try Laurie Tulloch's house," someone advised him, and so off he went again, only to find that this had also been a wild goose chase. "Try Bruce Hunter's house," he was told, when he started asking then if anyone knew where Elspeth had last been headed, and warily Robbie turned in that direction. But now it was no longer a case of running fast, for he was nearly dropping with exhaustion by this time. He ran a few steps, he walked a few steps, then ran again, and now also he realized he was by no means alone on the hill, for wherever he turned his eyes seemed to catch glimpses of figures outlined darkly against the green sky, weird figures that ran or danced or gestured strangely, and the fear of trolls grew so strong on him that he did not dare to wave or call or do anything which would draw their attention to himself. His right arm seemed to be powerless too, for, try as he would, he could not lift it to bless himself. Moreover, the words that trolls hate to hear seemed to have vanished from his mind. In panic at this, he tried to run faster, but like someone in a waking nightmare, he found that his feet had become ton weights and that he could no longer trust his own senses. He heard laughter crackling faintly on the still night air. He saw the strange figures drawing near, then vanish suddenly and reappear in different places. They loomed large against the night sky. They grew small again, small as trolls. Robbie ran on, slowly, his breath sobbing in ever-growing terror, yet still not knowing whether all this was really happening, or whether it was only the strange green sky and the hill's uneven outline that were playing tricks on his sight. One thing he did know, however, and with the utmost despair he admitted this to himself, he had now completely lost track of Elspeth, and so now the only purpose in his running was to escape all those weird figures that threatened him, and then somehow to find the Scuttler. Another sound broke on his hearing, a sound much louder than the occasional crackle of laughter. It came from the seashore, from the beach down at the Vaux, and instantly he knew what it was, for once before he had heard that same sound. It was Tam howling, he realized. Somewhere down at the Vaux, Tam was howling the same long drawn-out cry of mourning he had raised at the moment of old Da's death. For all his terror then, Robbie stopped dead in his tracks. There could be only one reason for that cry, he told himself. Finlayson and Elspeth must be down at the Vaux at that very moment, and Tam was there too, howling for Elspeth's last moments on earth. The thought of this hit Robbie with a shock that was like cold water dashed on his face. He gasped, filling his brain clearing on the instant and the power coming back into his right arm. Quickly he blessed himself and called aloud the word that trolls hate to hear. And like black shadows snuffed out by the sun, the leaping figures on the hillside disappeared. Or so it seemed for the moment anyways. But a second look showed Robbie that some of the figures were still running along the skyline of a ridge above the point where he stood. They were peculiarly shaped figures too, but now that he had his courage back, he could tell who they were. For a moment, Robbie turned from them to look down towards the Vaux. A boat rocked there at the water's edge. Two forms stood on the beach above the boat. Some distance from the forms a dog crouched, mournfully howling. Robbie took a deep breath. Then he faced back toward the line of running figures and he yelled, "Scuddler! Scuddler!" The figures stumbled to a halt. They turned to the sound of his voice and stood poised on the ridge. Now they looked like a row of haystacks planted there, their long petticoats bellowing around them, their tall hats poking the sky. Robbie drew in another lungful of breath and yelled again, "Scuddler!" One figure broke from the line and came plunging towards him. Robbie turned and ran ahead of it, shouting back over his shoulder as he ran, "Finlayson, Scuddler! Finlayson! Down there, look! He's going off with Elspeth!" The tall form of the Scuddler overtook Robbie and thundered ahead of him towards the beach. But Robbie was not far behind, and the closer he drew to the beach, the more clearly he could see what was happening there. Finlayson had Elspeth by the hand. His arm was outstretched as if it were trying to pull or coax her near the boat at the water's edge. But Tam was still at his mournful howling, and Elspeth was hanging back like someone frightened to take another step. "Let her go," the Scuddler roared, and Elspeth began struggling to snatch her hand from Finlayson's grip. The Scuddler roared again, and with a flying leap that took him on to the shingle of the beach, he seized the other hand. Elspeth screamed, a loud scream of fear and pain, and small wonder either, for now she was stretched out between him and Finlayson, which each of them determined to pull her from the other. "You'll kill her!" yelled Robbie, for no one knew better than himself then that the magic behind the guising had turned the Scuddler into the earth god he was supposed to be. And how could anyone live pulled like that between all the forces of earth magic and sea magic? "I'll kill him first," the Scuddler roared, and made a sudden lunge that let him circle Elspeth's waist with one arm. The movement took Finlayson by surprise. He stumbled, and in the flash of time it took for this, his grip slackened enough to let Elspeth snatch her hand free. One swinging movement of the Scuddler's arm took her out of Finlayson's reach, with Elspeth behind him then. The Scuddler backed away up the shingle, but Finlayson shouted with rage and leapt forward to close with him. Tam dashed for cover. Elspeth sank weeping to her knees, and Robbie edged as close as he could to the two forms swaying back and forth across the shingle. Both men were panting now, their bodies locked in a hating embrace as each tried for a hold that would bring the other down. But Finlayson's rush at the Scuddler had carried the fight above high water mark, and with feelings of dreadful joy, Robbie saw the result this was having. The Scuddler was big enough already, for he was a tall man, and his high, pointed hat made him even taller. But now, to Robbie's eyes, he seemed to grow bigger and more powerful with every moment that passed, and Finlayson was also changing. Finlayson was aging, it seemed to Robbie. The skin of his face was withering, falling away into wrinkles. His hands were becoming an old man's hands, stringy with muscles bunched like badly tied knots. The youthful lines of his body were sagging into something twisted and evil and very, very old. The movement of the Scuddler's long legs set his straw petticoat flailing like a harvest field struck by storm. His wide shoulders seemed to grow even wider in a heave of terrible efforts to break the grip of the stringy old hands. The tall cone of his hat towered ever higher against the green-lit sky. The white mask beneath the hat loomed ever more threatening and mysterious over Finlayson's aging face, and with a final tremendous heave, the Scuddler brought him to the ground. "Watch out!" shouted Robbie then, for the two of them had fallen right across the high water mark. The shout brought Elspeth to his side, crying out in fear and trying to hold him back as he made the dash forwards towards the struggling figures. But Robbie was too desperate to be held at that moment. "The high water mark!" he yelled, wrenching himself free of Elspeth's hands. "Get him back over the high water mark, Scuddler!" The Scuddler knelt astride Finlayson and gave a heave that was meant to lift him clear over the dry seaweed marking the highest point of the tide. But this movement freed one of Finlayson's arms, and he was still half in his own territory, which meant he had not yet conquered. The free hand came quickly up in a thrust that sent both himself and the scuddler rolling over and over, and a horrified Robbie saw them coming to a rest, well below the high water mark. Shouting, he ran after them, knowing that any moment now the time might come for him to act, for now they were in Finn Learson's territory, where his sea magic was bound to beat the scuddler's power. "Robbie!" Elspeth screamed after him. "Robbie!" But he ran on, paying not the slightest heed to this. It was Finn Learson who was on top in the struggle now. Finn Learson with all his youth and strength restored. Finn Learson kneeling over a scuddler suddenly stripped of all the earth god's power. One hand held the scuddler down, the other hand was stretched out towards the white mask. A single jerk whipped the mask free, and a face stared up from the shingle, the flushed and angry face of Nicol Anderson. Finn Learson breathed a long sigh of understanding. A grin of triumph spread over his face, and quick as a flash, he shot out both hands to Nicol's throat. Nicol gasped at their grip, and Robbie also gasped, for the deadly purpose of it was clear, and this was something he had not bargained for. When he persuaded Nicol to fix it so that he would be the one who played the scuddler. Finn Learson squeezed still harder, and Robbie threw himself forward, clutching and tearing at the death grip on Nicol's throat. "Leave him!" he yelled. "Let him live, or you'll never see your great Selkie's skin again." Finn Learson's head jerked up in astonishment, but his fingers were still gripping tight enough to choke Nicol, and Robbie hurried on. "I've got your skin, Finn Learson. I stole it from the cave, and if you kill Nicol, I'll never tell you where it is now." Slowly, Finn Learson's hands loosened their grip. Slowly he rose, and standing astride of Nicol, he glared down at Robbie. "What skin?" he challenged. "What fancy are you spinning now, Robbie Henderson?" "This is no fancy," Robbie told him defiantly, "and it is no use pretending with me, for I know who you are and why you came ashore. That's why I stole your skin, and that's why you'll never get it back without me." Finn Learson stepped clear of Nicol's body. "So you think you have the advantage of me now, do you?" he asked harshly. "Well, take me to this skin, boy, and then we shall see who really has the advantage." One powerful hand clamped down on Robbie's shoulder, keeping tight hold of him as he started forward in obedience to this urging. At the top of the beach, however, he managed to steal a backward glance that showed Elspeth running to help Nicol to his feet, and Tam frisking beside her as she ran. A first small thrill of triumph shot through Robbie then, and feeling braver than he had imagined he would at that moment, he led on to the place where Jarl Colby had hidden the great Selkie's skin.